Hi, welcome everybody. Please take a seat. This is the state of the farmed animal movement, and I'm really thrilled to be your moderator for this panel. I am Nicole Rawling. I am the CEO and co-founder of the Material Innovation Initiative. We have a booth outside. Please come join us. And why I'm particularly excited about moderating this session is I've been in the movement for a really long time, working in a variety of impact areas. So I actually started out in litigation at the Humane Society of the United States, and then I did undercover investigations and lobbying at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And then I spent a few months as the executive director of a farmed animal sanctuary. And then now I'm using the power of the markets to give consumers what they need, right? Most of you work on food. I used to work at the Good Food Institute, and now we're at the Material Innovation Initiative working on leather, wool, silk, down, and fur. There's a lot of ways that as animal advocates, we can affect change for animals. In this panel, we're going to hear from a wide range of experts on questions like, what are the factors that drive social change? What is the current state of the farmed animal movement in Asia and in general? What impact strategies excite you the most? And what are the challenges, successes, and emerging trends in our mission to improve the lives of animals in agriculture? Our first speaker today is Dr. Natasha Lee. She is a veterinarian from Malaysia with a master's in science in international animal welfare, ethics, and law from the University of Edinburgh. She is also a member of the Australian and New Zealand College of Veterinary Scientists. She has almost 20 years of experience in international animal welfare, ranging from project management, shelter medicine, veterinary education, and farmed animal assessment. She has managed a large variety of welfare projects across Asia and even led a campaign to include animal welfare science into veterinary curricula across Asia. She currently runs an animal welfare consultancy, Animal Happiness, which works with other organizations to carry out trainings, education, audit, and project management. So she will have a presentation for us today. I'm going to start by introducing all of the speakers, and then Natasha can come up. Our second speaker is going to be Prayoga, the Country Strategy Manager for Indonesia for Mercy for Animals. Ruli is a behavior change analyst with more than 15 years of experience in conservation, climate change issues, relief and humanitarianism, post-conflict and poverty issues in Indonesia and the rest of the East Asian region. He has a passion for creating and nurturing public movements for significant social and environmental change. His current focus is the sustainable food system. He is also interested in and has experience in forensic psychology, crisis management, advanced information systems, cybersecurity, corporate engagement, and legal reforms in Indonesia and the East Asian region. And then our final panelist, who unfortunately is going to be joining us virtually, is Harshdeep Singh from Open Philanthropy. He is a program associate where he works as a generalist grant maker in the farmed animal welfare team. Before joining Open Philanthropy, he worked as a consultant for Mercy for Animals in the government affairs and public policy team. Prior to that, he was associate at PLR Chambers, a law firm specializing in regulatory and policy affairs. So we have a really diverse group of speakers today, and I'm really excited to hear the strategies for the current farmed animal movement. So Dr. Lee, would you like to join us?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Natasha, and thanks for the introduction. I'm going to speak here about what my observation is around Asia, and particularly in Southeast Asia. And I'm speaking from the experience of a vet. So vets, as you know, we work quite closely with farmers. So this is my observation within my industry and how we work with farmers. Oops. So I'm going to focus on eggs, and we're going to look at the cage-free movement as opposed to all the other farm animal movement, because I think this is one of the areas that in Asia is a little bit forward. So we're going to look at the movement in eggs, cage-free eggs. In Southeast Asia, we consider egg as one of the cheapest animal protein. So a lot of governments from the beginning has already persuaded farmers and try to grow this industry because it is not just one of the cheapest, but also at the same time, farming chickens is more conducive in our environment as opposed to cattle or other animals. So chicken has been in our region for many, many decades already. And a lot of times right now, the status quo, when you think about chicken farming, it always looks like this. Very intensive farming, or it has to be in battery cages, because that is the way we've been taught in terms of how we can produce cheap protein for the public. So when you talk about chicken farming, this is what it normally looks like. You have rows and rows of battery cages. You have from very intensive farmings with many layers of rows of battery cages. You also have slightly less intensive, more small scale, but as you can see, it's still very much battery cages farming. In fact, if you look at backyard chicken farming, when they produce slightly more than what their family will consume, maybe they will produce and sell something at the side. This is what it looks like as well. So even though we talk about backyard farming, a lot of times we are still looking at battery cages. Because as I said, this is the status quo. This is how people think they should be rearing chickens, especially for egg production. So what changed? I would say the major turning point is basically when the European Union start talking about abolishing battery cages. Why? Because it makes people scared, because now you have things that are changing overseas. Eventually it would come here. So especially for operators that are exporting to Europe, they are the ones who will need to change first, because they need to follow European policy. But at the same time, you also have a lot of local farmers becoming more and more defensive. The more you push for change for people, the more defensive they'll become, especially something as ingrained as egg farming, because it has been in multiple generations. If you look at a lot of the big chicken farm companies, they have been in that same family for multiple generations. So this is what they think about. So they have become very, very defensive about it. And in fact, when you have the opinion of something, and you strongly hold that opinion about something, you start to look for evidence that will support your own opinions. So a lot of times they will listen to case studies that's coming out from Europe, how the producers there are going out of business because of the changes that's happening there. So it scares them even more. In fact, it's such a contentious issue that a lot of countries are not supporting the cage-free movement yet. So the OIE, or right now they call themselves WOA, they have a lot of different animal welfare codes, and still egg farming is still not up there yet, because we can't get a consensus around cage-free movement. Before I move on, just very briefly to touch a little bit about what cage-free means. So we have battery cages, as you've seen in the pictures earlier on, and the first movement away from battery cages is what we call this enriched cages or colony cages. But at the end of the day, they are still cages. So even in Europe, some parts might be accepting this kind of cages. They are still going to move away from this kind of cages. So we want to go really a cage-free method. So cage-free means no cage at all. They might still be in the barn, but they have the freedom to move around anywhere within the barn. It can be a simple one-floor type of cage-free system, as the picture on the left, or it can be a little bit more intensive with multi-tier aviary, as the picture on the right. Free range is one step above cage-free because you still have chickens in the barn, but every day you open the door to let them have access outside. So that ability to have the access outside is what we call cage-free system. So in Southeast Asia, what are the things that can influence the cage-free movement? So in my opinion, these are the few things that has so far influenced the cage-free movement. First thing is concern for health. If you look at the supermarkets, you will see a lot of products having organic labeling. Because people think that, giving them a lot of antibiotics, giving them a lot of chemicals, using a lot of pesticides on the plants is going to be, it can have an effect on human health. So the first priority when you're talking about a lot of people in Southeast Asia and why they choose a more expensive product is because health concern. Next is you have certain commitments from different parties. You can have hotel chains, you can have big fast food chains, you can have retail supermarkets committing to selling cage-free or animal welfare friendly products. Even though it might not be as widespread as it is, but the news there is important. So people are listening to the news, people are hearing about hotels using cage-free eggs, which means that people's perception of these eggs is of a higher quality type of eggs. Next is product variation. Last time, I remember going to the grocery store, I only had the choice of between chicken eggs or salted eggs. That's it. But now if you go into the supermarkets and you want to find eggs, you can have so much variety of eggs. You can have omega-3 eggs, you can have selenium eggs, you can have cage-free eggs, free-range eggs, you can have so-called kampung chicken eggs, white eggs, brown eggs, all types of eggs. So that product variation, firstly, it does help the farmers in terms of being able to sell their product at a different rate, but also perception from the consumer is that now they have to start to think what kind of eggs they want to buy. So it makes them stop to think what is the right eggs for themselves. And of course, public demand as a whole will of course push the whole cage-free movement. So for example, in Singapore, there's a lot of imported cage-free eggs from Australia, and this is quite costly. So it pushed local producers in Singapore to start producing cage-free eggs themselves. In fact, there's a few producers that are purchasing eggs from Malaysia and selling them as cage-free eggs in Singapore. But the standards can vary quite differently. The final bit here I want to touch about is on agro-tourism. I know that a lot of Asian people are starting to think about what they can do over their weekends. And people who live in the city, in the last 2 decades, have never seen actual farm animals. So for them to be able to go to a farm and see some animals, for them is an escape from the city, a little bit of education for their children, and relaxation for themselves. But at the same time, a lot of this agro-tourism, they don't want to show you caged battery cages. They want to show you happy chickens. So they themselves will produce eggs in a very small scale, but most likely it will be in a free-range style. So you have that kind of exposure to the public. So next, what happens next? We need to have certification. So people are demanding for cage-free eggs. Now, how do you ensure that there are standards? I know that certified humane is probably one of the first certification that is here to look specifically at welfare-friendly products. But you also start to see governments starting to have their own certification as well. I know most Asian governments are very focused on organic certification, but it's not impossible. Public demand will push them to have eventually some kind of cage-free certification as well. Right, so you got your certification, you've got your commitments. What else do you need to do? So there are organizations that are actually tracking to see whether these companies promise and do what they promise. We also have Global Food Partners this year having the model farm, starting the model farm, so they can actually start to actually show people how it's done and use this as a training center. So my last few slides, I'll just talk about different ways that I've seen farmers transitioning to a cage-free style. We can't expect farmers to change from, completely change overnight for the entire farm. So we need to find a way to slowly introduce it to them. So what I've noticed is the easiest way is in a typical farm, you might have about 10, maybe 20 houses. 20 is a bit big, but around that, houses of chickens where you have battery cage chickens inside those houses. And because of the different cycles of egg production, at a certain point in time, some of those houses will be empty. And after a certain period, some of those houses need to be refurbished again because the materials inside have already corroded or have spoiled. So they need to put back investment into those houses to rechange them. And this is the right time to go in to say, hey, why don't you try with one or two of those houses in a very small scale, try a cage-free system. And that's how I see producers have started as well. So if you see the structure of the house, the barn, is still the barn that they use for cage eggs, except that they remove all the cages inside. They've replaced that with nest boxes instead. And if you look at the pictures here, a lot of these nest boxes, they are homemade type of nest boxes. They are basically trying it out on a very small flock of chickens. So once they are a bit more confident in how to manage these chickens, you can see them starting to scale up. So they can actually have more and more bigger flocks of chickens. They can also start to add more automation. So as previous slides, you can see the yellow buckets and the white buckets, that's manual feeding of the chickens. You have to manually go there and feed the chickens and put water into the buckets. But if you do automation, now you have to rely less on manual labor so much. So you can include automation, even though you might still be a little bit more small scale. Nest boxes can also be automated, so you don't have to go and manually collect the eggs there, so you can actually have conveyor belt to move them. And once they are confident enough to manage, you can actually encourage them to start a better system. To either you can start with a one-floor system, such as this, or a multi-tier aviary, such as this. So this will, of course, have higher investment at the start. But if we look at the data coming from Europe after 10 years of moving away from the battery cage system, we know that production levels can equal cage-free system. So what we need to really train ourselves is in management. I'll go maybe 1 minute over time to show you a little bit about the producer's perspective. So if you look at this paper, it's very good. So it'll tell you about a latest survey that's being done around different producers in Southeast Asia. So when we ask them why why are we still using cages? And you can see the majority answer is because management, ease of management. We also asked them, why do you think people are starting to change to cage-free system? And you can see that animal welfare is actually at the top of their answer. So we cannot simply say that all producers don't care about their animals' welfare. Actually, there is some concern for animal welfare there. Is it feasible? Majority of producers says yes, it actually is feasible. That's the green bars you can see. And what type of support they need in order to transition? Most of the time, they will say they actually need more technical advice and more training. So a bit more hand-holding with them in the beginning. They also need some resources and maybe backup financially as well. So it's not impossible. So what can we do next? This is my recommendation. We need to upscale, more training. We need to help them with the transition. We need to make sure that they are more familiar with the new management system and maybe help them assess access to financial assistance. We also need to find proof of concept where it actually is cost beneficial for farmers to change. So that's it for my presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. And Ruli, we'd love to invite you to the stage.
Good morning. Hello? I can hear you. Hello? Come on, you already have coffee, you should more energetic. Okay, so this is a good segue, transitioning from what we have learned from Chef Dave and Natalie. So I start with this morning sessions, when we learn about the journey of Chef Dave and why change is harder than we think. Okay, I will use this. Yeah. Sounds like your situation right now? So probably this is our problem. Your campaigns feel stalled out. And you know your strategy, but you aren't sure where to start. Sometimes we will facing these situations. Well, so in my opinion, so I speak as trying to zoom out what has happened, Yesterday we learned about the existing campaign, learning from the existing campaign, so I'm trying to zoom out, and for my opinion, there's no silver bullets for all change. There's no specific strategy that workable for everything, for everyone, but for sure, we will need all solutions to make an impact. That's really important. Yeah. So why people are resistant to change? We learned from this morning sessions that, somehow people see that I don't know what to expect. I need time to think about it. Am I good enough? I don't want to fail. Do I have a choice? What people think and what does it mean for me? If you see this all, I call it categorized, you may see that most of the people is really resistant to change is because of the psychological needs and neurological needs. Social needs and physical needs like what does mean for me is really, really low. And we learn, this Chef Dave opening is really give us really evidence on it. We can see that. Next. Then, how we do move people from apathy to actions. This is always become our questions, isn't it? Yes. Somehow, we always overestimating willpower. We always feel that we can do everything. We are really feeling really high confidence to do it. And we are more capable than we are. So that's how we always feeling fail, down. And that's why we need to have like a set realistic goal. Practice self-awareness, use strategies. Prioritize your list and build habits. Willpower, somehow it's good, but also we have to be strategists. That's the key point. Somehow, when we overestimating willpower, we will get into burnout situations, and we always in that kind of situation. Okay. Yeah. Question is, do we want actions or do we want a change? Do our campaign want to have just an actions or series of actions, or we want to change? This morning's session showed that what Chef Dave has done is build change. And then there's three things that I want to explain here, that actions, routines, and behaviors. Those kinds have a different kind of meaning. What is actions? It's the audience need to be active at least once a year or less. It's one-time actions and minimum high level of effort. An example is like, donate to giving, sign a petition, is an actions. And what is routines? It's to be active quarterly or several times a month, a week, and involve more efforts than a behavior. And this is an example. Attend quarterly meetings, like this one. So, or we have like a Monday meetings, that's the routines. And what is behavior? It's the audience who really need to adopt a new habit and then adopt the routine itself as part of the daily routine. So what we want actually in our movement, what we want in our campaign is just a action, just a routines, like annually we come to this meeting, or really want to have, really need to change the behavior itself. And for sure, if we already define this, we will have a strategy on how we develop our project sequence, communication approach, and for sure, choice of messages. Yeah, that's the change, the behavior example there. Okay, changing the weather, turning anxiety into activism. For now, the younger generations now, the Gen Z, yeah, we can call it, now is really, in the past decade, is really fed up actually. They now trap it into online games, and they really more on the situations that's not really have a more passionate. So this is our opportunity, turning their anxiety into activism. This is really important. What we can do is start to attacking current public perceptions. What is the example is what the Chef Dave has told us this morning, being a vegan. It's really challenging. And then this trying to attacking current public perceptions about the vegans in Malaysia. And that is really successful. Build connections through personal contact rather than trying to burst on the scene all at once means that building personal contacts, working with people, talk with people, connecting with people interpersonally, that's really important. Because, and then connecting to the mainstream issues, climate change, food system, poverty, malnutrition. That's also important. And SafeDev, they connecting this to public health and culture. That's why it's really, really, really good, very successful. How it works. Change always happens in context. It's not about our thinking or the potential benefit, so sometimes and somehow change should be works in context. We need to realize that the stage of change has a different from individually. And the stages have a range from beginning and to the maintenance stage, and this change should be in the journey. So I just want to explain this stage. There's a stage, pre-contemplation stage, contemplations, preparations, actions, and maintenance. I want to give you an example of pre-contemplation. This pre-contemplation is people who still don't know anything. They need informations. So when our campaign targeting this group on this stage, what we can do is giving them informations, giving them posters, giving them leaflets. Then people who in the contemplations, who are they? People who trying to in the choosing something, you know. What we can do for them? Do we have to give them information? No, they already have information. Now they have to choose. What we can have, what we can do? Give them options. Give them options. Give them something that you can do this. On preparation, this is people who already want to be a vegan, for example. What we have to do? We give them information? No, they will reject it. Give them options? They already in there, you know. We need some of affirmations. What we can do in the preparation stage, people, we set the pathways. Back to SafeDev presentation this morning, he really put that in the context. Like provide recipes, provide guidance. And people who are already in the actions, do we need them to put to give as a like a posters, like informations, choices? No. We should give them a project. And for the maintenance, this is really important. What we can do for them is really getting involved in our movement. Otherwise, they will be relapse, and when we not maintenance them, they get lost, and that will be a laggard for us. Somehow in the movement, we always forgot these steps, so we always give them the same information, same in the different stage. So that's why they not really sustain. Okay, social influence and conformity. Again, change that align with the social norms and more likely to be accepted. Yeah, like cultural things that's more really important for fostering change itself. And informational influences are really important because we need to have like valid information. It's not misleading information. It's really clear and concise information, and it's easy to reach. Peer pressures is really important. When our friends is already become part of the movement or part of the community or become a vegans, so this is really important because people tends to be in the group. And when the group is being changed, that can be lead to the another change. Yeah. Okay. So, this is really good. I always can refer to Chef Dave presentation this morning because this really relate. What I explained here is really the thing behind the Chef Dave has done, So, influencers or social proof. What is your preference? Your preference doing influencer, using influencer as the agent of change, like endorse some activity. Yes, we can do it. We could involve a celebrity, key of influencers to bring our message as our message ambassadors. And social proof is we ask some other people, we build in, we nurturing in organically. And we build the group itself. And we can show to the audience that there's a peoples there, and this is organically growth. So it's not become you are our celebrities, so we follow you. But this is really, we will need this. What Chef Dave has done, it's both social proof and influence. They start with the social proof, and then when comes become an influencer, they will be extended their impact. Okay. So, what is we doing make change in the appropriate context? Social proof is really important. That's how we build the movement. That's how we can fostering and sustain the movement. We have to build social proof itself. It's not just endorsement, but it's really long-term and self-growth and organically growth group itself. What we can do to make this happen is first, we have to create this as a change, the safe to do. Then, it's reduce their concerns of getting judged and creating sense of belonging, the cultural factor. I cook a Malaysian vegan recipe. This is creating a sense of belonging. And for sure, it's fun to say. I mean, like, it's vegan or eat theirs. So, I mean, this is really important. So, what Chef Dave has done is, is through this. It's change safe to do. So, avoid, directly to that. You have to be vegan, But talking about public health is easy. You don't have to eat. It's not become your food, like a falafel, something like that. You can see, you can eat the Malaysian traditional food, but in a vegan way, safe to do. Concern and judges. So, we are, if not, you are not vegan yet, but you can try this food, And creating sense of belonging using a cultural approach to build in. And second is, vegans is fun. So that's just explaining what Chef Dave has done in the more theoretical way, and then this is the way. And we already have a really successful example on that. Okay. flipping out the change script. Somehow, we always say that we focus on the problem. We become a problematologist. We always seek problem. Let's change to the solutionologist. We have to become expert to find a solution, focusing on the meaningful benefits. Focus not what to do, focusing on what people should do, making fun an easy choice. For sure, leveraging social proof. So my focus is on the how to build a social proof itself. So I will be quick, because right now time. So in the change process, this is something that we have to remove this. I call it the frictions. This is the friction. So we have to really remove those frictions and reinforce the enablers, signal, and other factor like make a behavior worthwhile. Behavior change or worthwhile. It means make a become vegan is worthwhile. That's really important. Right? And this is something that we're always facing up. No one's paying attention, how to listen to our audience to drive change. For me, it's really important to just listen and then talk smarter. What do they need? What do they want? And what will help them? That's something that we have to find out. Aligning what they need and looking for your cause. And for sure, you would have to shout to be heard. That's really important. You should more strategic to that. And this is the reasons that we have to right to influence other. You can read it. And start change and growing movement. Communicating the norm. Leverage influence. Increase self-efficacy. Show this desired behavior. Make it popular and safe. I think most of you all understand, you need to understand that the change is not happen inside the movement, but should be happen outside the movement. That's how we build, not inside it, but really outside it. That's important. So I will conclude this presentation with this. Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you so much. Oh, it's always wonderful to have a presentation with dancing. We need to do that more often. So right now we do have Harshdeep hopefully joining us on video any second.
Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, Harshdeep, can you hear me?
Awesome. Yes, loud and clear, Nicole. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yes, we can see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Where are you calling in from?
I'm currently in San Jose, in California.
Nice. Well, thank you for joining. So I will pass off the stage to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm just going to time myself. Good morning, everyone. It's evening for me, but I'm glad to be here. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there in person, but thank you so much to the organizers for allowing me to present nonetheless. So as Nicole said, my name is Harshdeep Singh. I'm a program associate with the Farm Animal Welfare Team at Open Philanthropy. For those of you who may not be familiar, Open Philanthropy is a philanthropic foundation based in San Francisco, and we've been giving in the domain of farm animal welfare for about 8 years now. So today, my presentation, I thought I would just focus broadly on the state of the farm animal welfare movement globally, some of the successes we've had, some of the disappointing wins, some of the disappointing losses, sorry, and then broadly the second half of my presentation, I thought I'd just focus and talk about some of the lessons we've learned from our grant making in Asia. So I'm just going to share my screen right now. Nicole, can you confirm if you can see my presentation? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. And we can see you too.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so first thing I just want to talk about is some of the species that Open Philanthropy focuses, that the Farm Animal Welfare Team at Open Philanthropy focuses is giving on. It's egg-laying hens, layer hens, as in chickens raised for meat, i.e. broiler chickens, and farmed fish, and to a lesser extent, wild caught fish as well. And I think, like, before I go to my next slide, the reasons why we focus on these three species should be clear. It's because they are the most numerous farm species in the world. So here are just some figures from the global numbers, and these are figures of animals alive at any point in time in each of these countries and globally. So if you can look at the last three columns, that is broilers, layers, and farmed fish, you'll see those numbers most of the time definitely by a long shot outnumber the first three columns.
Sorry, Harshdeep,
And so,
can I interrupt
yes.
you really quickly? Just because of the feed, do you mind talking a little bit slower?
Yes, thank you
you
so
so
much,
much.
Nicole. Yeah. So just to repeat myself, the reasons we focus on broiler chickens, layer hens, and farmed fish is because broadly, compared to the other species on this table, you'll see, more often than not, these species outnumber the other ones. So if you look at the last three columns, it's far and away beyond. Next thing, I just thought I'd talk about some of Open Philanthropy's work and the farmed animal welfare movement's work in securing welfare reforms for layer hens. So anyone who's familiar with Open Philanthropy and the farmed animal welfare movement would know that our giving, one of the first batch of grants we made back in 2016 was for cage-free campaigns in the West. And this chart outlines the number of cage-free commitments that advocates have secured that have applicability globally. So these are like companies that are based in multiple regions. I've stopped the chart at 2020 because I think in 2020 is when we hit 2,000 global cage-free commitments, which I think is pretty amazing. And advocates across the world have, worked tirelessly for this and continue working tirelessly for this. So I think this was like a great achievement for the movement. This slide and my next slide, I just thought I'd talk about. The US layer hen flock that was cage-free, let's say in 2016, about 5% of the layer hen flock in US was cage-free, whereas today we're at about 38.7 of all hens are cage-free in the US. And as a result of that, over 100 million hens alive today are out of cages, again, thanks to the tireless work of advocates in the US. Here, excluding UK, this is the number of layer hens that are out of cages in the EU. In the EU, we started off at a higher number, so it was about 50, we were like about flatlining at about 50 to 52% of the flock was cage-free around 2015-16. And today we're about 60.3% is cage-free. And as a consequence of that, about 235 million odd hens alive today are out of cages. Again, pretty amazing work, and I think the hens would be grateful for sure. This slide I just wanted to briefly touch upon. So making cage-free commitments is one thing. Companies following through and implementing those is another. And I think a few years ago, there was big fear that companies may have made a bunch of cage-free commitments, but they haven't really followed through. How do we ensure they implement those? And I think advocates have done a great job at running implementation campaigns. So this data is from the Open Wing Alliance. It basically cross-references commitments by reporting status. So the black there is, the commitments that have been fulfilled, as against on the x-axis, you'll see the years in which the company's cage-free commitments were due. In gray is companies that have not fulfilled their commitments but are reporting on their progress. And the red there, which is disappointing, that let's say companies that had their commitments due in 2022, just under 1/3 are not reporting, which is not great, but I think it's not as big a doom and gloom scenario as you were thinking a few years ago. Next, broiler chickens, or chickens raised for meat. This slide, I think, is, whenever I see this image, it's one of the most heartbreaking things for me. So this is basically 3 strains of broiler breeds, and their weight at 0 days, 28 days, and 56 days, and cross-transposed against what they weighed in 1957, 1978, and 2005. So it's really heartbreaking that at hatching in 57, they were about 34 grams. At 2005, it's 44 grams. And at 56 days, 905 grams and 4.2 kgs today. It's really, really a heartbreaking slide, and I think just speaks to some of the welfare conditions that these hens or that these chickens are raised under. So what have advocates broadly been seeking, or what are the welfare requirements, welfare asks that advocates have been seeking for broiler chickens? It's not as simple as cage-free, which I think is one reason why it's been harder to secure welfare reforms from companies. So the Better Chicken commitment broadly focuses on 5 things: better welfare breeds, like slower growing breeds, essentially, to counteract the earlier slide; stocking density requirements; humane slaughter, so controlled atmosphere stunning; environmental standards, which is natural light, perching requirements; and third-party auditing is the other one. Progress on broiler welfare has not been as great as it's been for cage-free, but it's still been pretty impressive in my opinion. In the green here, you'll see US corporate broiler welfare commitments, and in the orange is international commitments. And I think in about 2019, 2020, we saw a great spike, and that came down, I think, since subsequent 2020, largely because of COVID, but still great testament to companies that have, or to the advocates for securing this. Farmed fish, I think this is something that I'm particularly joyous about, because let's say a few years ago, farmed fish welfare was not something on anyone's radar, but there's been a bunch of good news for farmed fish. One thing is retailers in the EU. So for example, Tesco advocates have secured farm welfare requirements for farmed fish. They've publicized that policy. In Germany, the Albert Schweitzer Foundation has got commitments from all retailers to commit to their basic recommendations for animal welfare. And in the Asian context, I just want to highlight the work of the Fish Welfare Initiative and Shrimp Welfare Project, who are doing amazing work. FWI in India, and my numbers are a bit dated, but they have worked with over like 70, 80 farms to improve the welfare of over 500,000 farmed fish through an alliance of industry and NGOs, which is amazing work. And the Shrimp Welfare Project, and you can go on the website, they've like recently signed a bunch of MOUs with producers to get them to commit to like limits on stocking densities, removal of eye stalk ablation for shrimp, which is a particularly grueling process, a process where their eyeballs are extracted when they're alive to improve their growth rate, and also commit to higher stunning requirements. So there's a Vietnamese producer they've worked with, and that's going to impact about 285 million shrimp per year, which is fabulous. On a slightly more desolate note, in the EU, this is something I was personally very excited about. So in 2020, advocates secured a European Citizens Initiative where they got the European Commission to commit to ending cages in the EU. Earlier this year, like last week, in fact, we found out that this was not going to happen this year. The European Commission had, at the end of last year, promised to pass or to introduce legislative proposals to end cages for hens, rabbits, geese, ducks, etc. They have gone back on their promise. It's not dead, but it's not going to happen this year. I think this is an important, I think there's a lot to learn for advocates from this work. I think one thing is it really highlights how difficult it is to get meaningful farm animal welfare legislation passed, because, a few years ago, we were very positive that the EU, which broadly had higher welfare standards, would pass this. If they have backtracked, it's going to be probably really hard elsewhere. The second thing I think, and along these lines, is that it highlights the need for a broader spectrum of political support from, let's say, center-right parties. Those of you who are following this work would know that, like, in the last month or so, the support that came from political parties in the EU was largely from the Green parties, the left-leaning parties. I think it really highlights the need to get bipartisan support for any legislation passed or for any legislation advocacy. And the last thing I think is just not to be too disheartened, but sometimes things are just beyond our control. So the reason cited by a lot of politicians in the EU was that the Ukraine war really has made food prices shoot up, and which is why they could not afford to have something animal welfare legislation, which would make food prices rise a little more at this point in time. It would just not be good for one, optics, and two, it probably wouldn't be passed. And now, and I'm a little bit behind time maybe, but just to talk about what our lessons have been from our grant making in Asia. And how I thought I'd do this is just look at some of the individual countries that I highlighted in the beginning and talk about what tactics have worked, which groups have done really excellent work in these regions. So in China, which is definitely a very hard country to work in, I think as Dr. Lee highlighted, GFP has worked really well to introduce, to get model farms set up there. So they signed an MOU with the university, and hopefully the model farm will be set up. And this has worked really well because it sort of shows a more collaborative approach, which is definitely the need of the hour when advocating in countries like China and even in India. And there's also the farm animal. The second thing is capacity movement building. So I think just building a movement. So there's the International Farm Animal Welfare Fellowship. They've done an excellent job in recruiting fellows, having them undergo a 14-month fellowship program. And then those fellows subsequently have gone on to get jobs in industry. So animal welfare certifiers in the country, agri-food businesses. And I think that's a really clever way to make change is getting advocates and individuals with an animal welfare leaning in industry itself. In India, I think strategic litigation is something which has worked well for some things, not that well for other things. So some of you may be familiar, in 2018, advocates secured an interim ban on battery cages in India, and that stood for about 5 years. An interim ban on new battery cage facilities being set up in India, and that stood for 5 years, which is a great accomplishment in itself. However, earlier this year, it was overruled. I think producer outreach is also something that has worked really well, as highlighted by the examples of Fish Welfare Initiative and the Shrimp Welfare Project. In Indonesia, I think we've seen great success with cage-free corporate outreach work, and kudos to like Animal Friends Yoga, Sinergia Animal. They've come together and they've shown really how impactful it can be when you pool your resources together, work well, and they've secured commitments from Super Indo. It's one of the largest retailers in the country. They've secured about 30 plus cage-free commitments, including from restaurants with about 100 locations in the region. I think that's excellent. And they've also used their undercover investigations really well to facilitate that. In Malaysia, sorry, just looking at my notes, I think things have been a bit harder in Malaysia. But I think earlier this year, advocates secured a cage-free commitment from a hypermarket, Maiden, which is huge, and that's like great work. And advocates are also working with the government to get cage-free egg production guidelines passed as a first step towards hopefully future cage-free legislation. In the Philippines, again, very similar. And I think just one overarching theme for me, when you contrast the work of advocates in the West versus in Asia, I think producer outreach is something that has worked. That's a tactic that has been much more impactful in Asia as opposed to the West. And some of the ways they've gone about that is, again, model farms, model cage-free farms, to show producers that it is possible to do this sustainably, financially sustainably, and show them also like inculcate like good management practices for those farms. I think that's something that's worked really well. And yeah, I think one second. Yeah, government policy as well in Philippines. So I think a couple of years ago, the Philippines Department of Agriculture signed into effect cage-free production standards, which advocates lobbied for, and they're still working to get further cage-free certification guidelines passed. Similar work in Thailand, I think. Something that's differed is there's been a lot more government engagement in terms of trainings, directly training government officials in the Department of Agriculture, et cetera, working on these issues on humane slaughter work, on cage-free standards, and then using that to get further cage-free standards passed. And Vietnam, which I think is, personally, I've like, my knowledge of Vietnam is not as strong, but there are some groups who have worked there to get earlier this year, or maybe late last year, the first producer commitment to completely phase out farrowing crates and gestation crates from producer supply by 2025, which is amazing. And this was again facilitated heavily by working directly with the producers, getting experts, from other regions that may have successfully done this to come to the country, work with the producers, train them, maybe slightly handhold. And that's also been done in parallel with training government officials on, humane slaughter methods that are just more effective and cheaper to implement. So these are just some examples. I really hope I wasn't speaking too fast and I was clear, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Harshdeep. So, and unfortunately, I'm sure everyone's noticed we're pretty far over time. We had some really good questions specifically about how we can work together more as an industry. What I would encourage everybody to do is approach the speakers on your own in the coffee break, even message them or anybody in the movement within the app, but we don't have time for questions right now. So thank you again. Please thank all the speakers.